Okay, so let's spend some time talking about ways to live without electricity. But first, we have to learn a little something about the history of electricity and electrification. Our dependence on grid utilities is another link to the slavery chain. To begin our discussion on the electrical grid, I want to take you on a bit of a journey through time to the year of 1752, the year that Benjamin Franklin was reputed to have flown a kite with a metal key on it in a dark and stormy Philadelphia sky. Contrary to how life was still lived in the old world of Europe, there had developed in the colonies a very broad and thriving middle class in America. There was a very wide and stark chasm between the very rich and the very poor in the Georgian era in Europe, but in America, the large middle class was considered well off, landed, and substantially independent and self-sufficient. Travelers through the colonies in the middle of the 18th century reported that there were few great estates to be seen, and that the bulk of the people lived well and comfortably, even on the smallest of land holdings. Although there were very few rich people in the colonies in the 1750s, the great mass of people existed in the comfortable expanse of the middle class. Yet throughout that middle class, most farmers considered themselves to be pretty well off. They answered to no human lord or royalty. They were masters of all that they surveyed. They were able to produce more than their family and their household could consume. And there were no government agents snooping around trying to micromanage their lives. In short, prior to the Industrial Revolution, the middle-class free landholder in the American colonies did not live by fear. In Europe, if you were not of the rich, landed, and titled class, you were expected to live your life in the service and fear of rich men with power. In South Carolina, it was virtually impossible to find anyone who was willing to serve in the government, even with the promise of political power, because most men had land and comfort and were responsible to their God and to themselves. They had no desire to exercise power over other men's consciences or lives. In Europe, joining the military was not always voluntary, but it was considered a way to escape the desperation and squalor of abject poverty. In Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia, it became difficult to get men to commit to the military defense of the colonies, because even the lower classes considered themselves free gentlemen and they lived good and comfortable lives. While there were some spectacularly rich and powerful estate and plantation owners who owned thousands or tens of thousands of acres, most colonial farms were around 40 to 50 acres, which was considered the maximum amount of land that a family could work without servants or slaves. In 1752 in Virginia, virtually every farmer grew at least some tobacco for sale, usually just enough to provide for the next year's cash needs. And almost every farmer had milk and beef cows, pigs, corn, vegetables, and a comfortable house. Yet we are told by modern educators in public schools and by many historians today that electricity was the great equalizer of men, and that all men except the very rich were poor, miserable, and downtrodden prior to the electrification of the country. This lie is the product of government-paid educators, history revisionists, and henchmen of the industrial elite. The fact is that for 300 years in America, there were people living healthy, happy, and productive lives without an electrical grid. And the massive middle class in 1750 was made up of individuals that by every standard of comparison would be considered very, very rich today. Words can be twisted and can change meaning. Educators on the public dole can make anything sound good or true, even lies, but facts are facts. Never listen to what some government lackey writing history books for a state university says. Go read the books that were written at that time. On the other hand, since the powers that be know that most people will never go check things for themselves, The lie will continue to be repeated in every public school in America. The corporate government gospel is that you are better off now, that you have cheap and readily available electricity than any generation before electrification. It would be heresy to say otherwise. But let's actually compare. Let's take a modern middle-class family, maybe yours. Do you own 50 to 200 acres of land outright? Or do you either rent or owe money on a quarter-acre plot next to people that you hardly know? Did you produce a large crop for sale last year without debt? Or were you paid wages to go to work to pay for stuff that you don't need? Do you own milk and beef cows, pigs, gardens, fields, pastures, and a comfortable house, all without debt? Or do you get all your stuff from the corporate store using government scrip backed by debt? Are you indebted to no man such that you can reject employment offers? It is a ridiculous assertion for anyone to claim that electrification has made people better off. We are fatter, we are more carnally, even criminally comfortable for a time. We do have more gadgets and entertainment, but we have lost so much more than we have gained. I think this is the thing that is the hardest for people to grasp, because modernists have been so brainwashed, corrupted, and colonized by less than 100 years of electrification. As I began to study these things, I was shocked by many of the things that I learned. Like, for example, why do you see so many pictures of Southern gentlemen and Southern ladies dressed up in heavy clothes and coats, even in the summer? Isn't it unimaginably blazing hot in the South in the summer without air conditioning and electricity? Wouldn't they all be wearing shorts and t-shirts, standing under some magnolia tree in the shade, cursing the day they were born? Is it possible that those southern plantation houses were actually designed to remain cool in the hot summer? And what's the deal with the lemonade? Didn't those southern rascals know that without refrigeration there would be no ice? And without ice, lemonade is just icky. And how did those Europeans have so many fine soirees, balls, and dances after dark? Is it possible that people who never knew anything about electricity found brilliant ways to live good and comfortable lives without it? We've been taught that people were just sitting around, poor and miserable in the dark for thousands of years, until some precious industrial savior like Thomas Edison came along and flipped on the light. I found out that nothing could be further from the truth. So here's a fun experiment. Go get some historical novels. Just pick an era and read novels written during that era, such as War and Peace, Fathers and Sons, Mark Twain, Jane Austen, Gone with the Wind. And when you read the books, think about how those people lived and how they did things. Ask yourselves, were these people ignorant cavemen? Electrification was not, and is often advertised, the end of the dark ages of backwardness and discomfort. When millions of ignorant rubes climbed out from under the rocks of ignorance into the glorious light of industrial genius and bliss, electrification was actually the beginning of a new spiritual dark age. The unholy trinity made up of the lusts of the flesh, the lusts of the eyes, and the pride of life. Electrification for most of the world happened towards the end of what is called the Second Industrial Revolution. It was the crowning achievement of the whole Industrial Revolution and brought to fruition the hopes and dreams of the industrialists, the bankers, and the prophets of the new consumer religion. Okay, so that's it for now. Next time we'll talk more in detail about the Industrial Revolution. Thumbs up if you like this video and you want to see more. And remember, a simple life is a beautiful life.